The elevator doors open onto the 41st floor of Aldermere Strategy Partners, and the receptionist doesn't recognize me. Why would she? 3 years ago, the last time I walked across this marble, I was carrying a cardboard box and trying not to let my hands shake. Today, my hands are still. Wendell Caldwell built this firm on a simple rule. Some people belong in the room, and some people fetch the coffee for the people in the room. He decided which one I was in under 4 minutes. I remember the exact phrasing. I've carried it for 3 years, like a stone in my coat pocket. He has no idea I'm in the building. He has no idea the acquisition closed at midnight. And he certainly has no idea whose signature is on the integration mandate sitting in his inbox, unread, with my name at the bottom. By 9 o'clock, he'll know all 3. Let me take you back, because the part where I walk into that building today doesn't mean anything until you understand what it cost me to leave it. For 7 years, I was a principal at Aldermere Strategy Partners. Not a partner, Wendell Caldwell made sure of that, but a principal, which in our world meant I did the work of 3 partners and got the title of none. Aldermere was a mid-tier consulting firm with delusions of being a top-tier one, and the gap between those 2 things was, more or less, my job. I closed it. Quietly, relentlessly, for 7 years. You wouldn't have found my name in the firm's marketing. You'd have found it on the actual work. The turnaround model that saved Brenvik Logistics from a forced sale, mine. The operating restructure that took Calder Foods from 11% margins to 19%, mine. Built over 14 months on red-eye flights and hotel room whiteboards. When a client renewed, it was because of the team I'd trained and the relationships I'd carried. When a pitch landed, it was usually my deck under someone else's name on the title slide. Aldermere occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower downtown, the 41st, 42nd, and 43rd. The 43rd was the executive floor, all blonde wood and silence, where the partners had corner offices with river views and assistants who screened their calls. I worked on the 41st, in an open bay with the senior associates, under fluorescent light that hummed at a frequency only I seemed to notice. I never minded. I told myself the floor didn't matter. The work mattered. That was my mistake. In a firm like Aldermere, the floor is the only thing that matters. Wendell Caldwell ran the place the way a certain kind of man runs everything, as a stage built for his own reflection. He was tall, silver at the temples, expensively dressed in that deliberate way that's meant to look careless. He had a gift, I'll give him that. He could walk into a client's boardroom and make the CEO feel like the smartest person in the room while quietly taking credit for every idea on the table. The clients loved him. The partners feared him. And the work, the actual work, he treated like plumbing. Necessary, invisible, beneath him. The first time I understood exactly where I stood, it was a Tuesday in March. We'd just won the Meridian Tower engagement, a $400 million property portfolio in distress, the biggest mandate the firm had landed in years. I'd written the entire pitch. I'd flown to 3 cities to model the recovery scenarios. In the pitch room, I'd been the one who answered the client's hardest question without a beat of hesitation, and I'd watched the CEO nod slowly and say, "That's the person I want running this." 2 days later, Caldwell scheduled the kickoff. I walked into the 43rd floor conference room, the good one, the one with the river, and found my name wasn't on the team slide. "Lucia." He said it warmly, the way you'd greet a caterer. "Glad you could join. We're just walking through the leadership structure for Meridian." On the screen, a partner I'd trained, 2 years my junior, listed as engagement lead. Below him, 3 names I didn't recognize. Below those, in smaller font, under a heading that said, "Support, Mine." I kept my face very still. I'd gotten good at that. I built the pitch, I said, quietly, just stating a fact. Caldwell smiled at the room, then at me. And the pitch was excellent, truly. But Meridian wants partner-level continuity at the table. He let the pause stretch, the way he always did, so everyone could feel it. Partners here need a certain polish, a presence. You're indispensable on the build, Lucia. Nobody questions that. Let's keep you where you shine. Where you shine. The fluorescent bay on the 41st floor. Around the table, nobody said a word. The junior partner studied his cufflinks. A senior associate I'd mentored for 3 years suddenly found something fascinating in her notepad. The silence wasn't agreement. It was something worse. It was the sound of an entire room deciding that this was simply how the world worked, and there was no profit in saying otherwise. I remember walking back to the elevator. I remember the way the 43rd floor carpet swallowed my footsteps, so that I made no sound at all, leaving the room where my work was being divided up among people who'd never read it. That night I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine I didn't drink and made a list. Not an angry list. A clinical one. Every client relationship that existed because of me. Every model that lived in my head and nowhere else. Every promise Caldwell had made and quietly broken. I wasn't planning revenge. I didn't have a plan yet. I was just, for the first time in 7 years, looking at Aldermere the way I'd look at one of my own clients, as a system with a hidden flaw and a single point of failure no one had noticed. The flaw, it turned out, was that they believed the work was the plumbing. They were about to learn the building couldn't stand without it. The Meridian slight was the warning shot. I should have read it for what it was. Instead, I did what I'd always done. I put my head down and worked as if competence were a shield instead of a target painted on my back. For 18 months, I ran Meridian from the support tier. The junior partner whose name sat above mine on the slide never once flew to a site. He'd appear at the quarterly client dinners, raise a glass, repeat my analysis back to the room in his own words, and collect the warmth that came with it. I rebuilt that $400 million portfolio from the ground up. He took the photo with the client's CEO for the firm's website. I told myself it didn't matter. I was lying to myself, and somewhere underneath the lie, a much colder part of me was simply taking notes. The end came on a Thursday in October. Caldwell called what he termed a talent review. Those happened on the 43rd floor. In the glass-walled conference room the associates called the aquarium, because everyone outside could watch you being evaluated through the glass while pretending not to. I walked in expecting to discuss my promotion to partner. I'd been promised consideration next cycle for 3 cycles running. I had a folder. Actual results, client testimonials, revenue I'd personally generated. I'd done what I always did. I'd over-prepared. Caldwell was already seated, flanked by the head of HR and one of his loyal partners. There was no chair pulled out for me. I pulled out my own. Lucia. He didn't look up from his tablet. We're going to make a change. I waited. The cold part of me went very quiet and very alert. The firm's evolving. We're moving up market. Bigger clients, bigger names, a different caliber of presence at the table. He finally looked at me, and his expression was almost gentle, which was the cruelest thing about it. You're a brilliant technician, Lucia. You always have been. But there's a ceiling, and we've both known it for a while. The partnership track isn't going to materialize. I think you know that. Through the glass, I could see the 41st floor team pretending to work. Heads down. Watching. I've generated more revenue than 2/3 of your partners, I said. Calm. I slid the folder across the table. It's all here. He didn't open it. He pushed it back toward me with one finger, the way you'd return a plate you hadn't ordered. Numbers aren't the issue. You don't have the polish. There it was again. That word, deployed like a verdict. Clients at this level want a certain kind of partner across from them. Someone who looks like they belong. I can't teach you that, and frankly, it's not fair to keep you chasing something that was never going to happen. He glanced at the HR director. We've prepared a generous separation. We'd love for you to think of it as a graduation. A graduation. From 7 years of carrying his firm. The HR director slid a single page toward me. The partner beside Caldwell, a man whose entire client book I had personally built and handed to him when I was too junior to keep it, examined the middle distance with great concentration. Not one of them looked at me. The aquarium glass turned the whole 43rd floor into a silent diorama. The partners at their desks, the assistants at their stations, all of them studiously not watching the woman being told her 7 years amounted to a polish problem. I have replayed the next 10 seconds 1,000 times. I did not argue. I did not cry. I did not, as Caldwell visibly expected, plead my case one more time. Something had shifted in me at the word graduation. A final clean click, like a lock turning. I understood, with total clarity, that there was nothing here worth saving and nothing here I needed to keep. Not the folder, not the title I'd never get, not their good opinion. "Where do I sign?" I said. Caldwell blinked. He'd wanted a scene. People like Wendell collect scenes. They feed on the begging, the breakdown, the proof that they hold all the power. I gave him a signature and a flat, pleasant smile, and I watched something flicker across his face that I'd remember for 3 years. The small disappointment of a man who's been denied his applause. "You're handling this well," he said, recovering. "That's mature. You'd be surprised what I can handle." I signed. I stood. And here is the detail he never noticed. The detail that mattered more than anything in that folder. As I gathered my things, I did not hand back the relationships. You can't put a relationship in a cardboard box for security to inspect. The Brenvik CFO who trusted me with his board. The Calder Foods CEO who texted me directly, bypassing the firm entirely. The Meridian client who'd said on day 1, "That's the person I want running this." Caldwell thought he was releasing a technician. He was releasing 7 years of loyalty that had never, not for 1 minute, belonged to Aldermere. That afternoon, I carried my box to the elevator. The 41st floor was silent. The senior associate I'd mentored caught my eye through the glass and mouthed, "I'm sorry." And I believed she meant it. And I also understood that her sorry would never once translate into a word spoken aloud in a room where it could cost her anything. The doors closed. 41 floors down, I watched the numbers fall. By the time I hit the lobby, I wasn't thinking about Aldermere anymore. I was thinking about who, exactly, I was going to call. Let me pause here for just a moment. Right at the doors closing, before I tell you who I called. I'm curious what you would have done in that conference room. When he pushed the folder back with one finger and called it a graduation, would you have argued, or would you have signed and smiled like I did? Tell me in the comments. Fight or walk? I read every reply, and the split always surprises me. And if you've ever watched someone get dismissed as support staff by a person who couldn't do their job for a single day, go ahead and subscribe. This channel is built for exactly that feeling and for what comes after it. Because what comes after it, for me, started with one phone call from the lobby of that tower. And 3 years later, that call is the reason Wendell Caldwell is about to have the worst Monday of his life. The call I made from the lobby was to a woman named Ines Dorval. 3 years earlier, Ines had tried to recruit me twice. She was a senior partner at Varenza Group, a firm Aldermere's partners spoke about the way smaller predators speak about larger ones, with a contempt that doesn't quite cover the fear. Varenza was everything Aldermere pretended to be: disciplined, global, and ruthless about one thing above all else, which was talent. Ines had told me, both times, "Call me the day they finally fail to see you." I'd kept her card in the same coat pocket where I kept Caldwell's word polish like a stone. I called her from the lobby. She answered on the second ring. "They let you go," she said. "Not a question." "They graduated me." A pause. Then a low laugh. "Be in my office tomorrow at 8. Bring nothing. I don't need your deck. I've seen your work for years. I just needed you to be available." I want to be honest about what happened next, because it wasn't a movie. There was no overnight triumph. There were 3 years of work, harder than anything I'd done at Aldermere, because at Varenza the work was finally mine. I came in as a principal again. I'd learned not to care about the title going in, and within 11 months I made partner. Not because anyone gave it to me for polish. Because I closed the Brenvik refinancing that Aldermere had bungled after I left. Because the Calder Foods CEO followed me to Varenza inside a quarter and brought his board with him. Because the Meridian client, when his portfolio started slipping under the junior partner whose name had been above mine, picked up his phone and called me directly. And I was, by then, somewhere that let me pick up. That was the quiet thing Caldwell never understood about what he'd released. The relationships came with me. Within 18 months, 3 of Aldermere's 5 marquee clients were Varenza clients. Caldwell told his partners they'd outgrown those accounts. The truth was simpler and more humiliating. The accounts had outgrown him. The moment the person doing the actual work walked out his door with a cardboard box. And here is the thing about a firm that runs on plumbing: it refuses to respect. The plumbing leaves and the building looks fine. For a while. The lights stay on. The marketing keeps running. And then, 18 months later, 2 years later, the foundation that everyone assumed was load-bearing turns out to have been a single person, and that person is gone, and the cracks start at the top. By this spring, Aldermere was quietly failing. Revenue down 4 straight quarters. 2 partners had defected. The Meridian engagement had collapsed into litigation. Caldwell, I heard this through the network, the way you hear everything, had spent 18 months looking for a buyer to bail him out before the firm's debt came due, and finding that nobody serious wanted a consulting firm whose best people had already left. Nobody serious except one. Varenza had been hunting an acquisition to deepen its mid-market footprint for a year. When Aldermere came up on the list, Ines called me into her office and slid the file across her desk. The same gesture Caldwell had used to push my folder away, except this time the file was for me. "You know this firm better than anyone alive," she said. "Better than the man running it. If we buy it, I want you to run the integration. Every team, every account, every person on those 3 floors reports up through you until it's absorbed." She watched me. Is that going to be a problem, given the history? I thought about the aquarium glass, the river view I was never allowed to keep, the word graduation. "No," I said. "It's going to be a pleasure." We closed at midnight on a Sunday. I signed the integration mandate as senior partner and head of integration, Varenza Group. The document went out automatically to all Aldermere leadership at 12:04 a.m., a standard post-close notification, dry as paper. Effective immediately, Aldermere Strategy Partners is a wholly owned division of Varenza Group. Integration will be led by L. Marlowe, senior partner. All Aldermere personnel will report through the integration office during the transition. Caldwell, I would later learn, had gone to bed before midnight. He woke at 6. He saw the email at 6:40. He did not, at first, connect L. Marlowe to the technician he'd graduated 3 years ago. There are a great many Marlowes in the world, and Wendell Caldwell had never bothered to remember the full names of people he'd decided didn't matter. But something in him went still. I know this because his assistant, who had quietly hated him for years and would become one of my most useful allies by the end of that first week, described it to me later. He read the email twice. He set down his coffee. He told her to get Varenza's transition lead on the phone, the Marlowe person, to establish the chain of command early. He wanted, she said, to make sure everyone understood who really ran Aldermere, acquisition or not. She dialed. She put it through. And 41 floors up, in a corner office that had a river view I had never once been allowed to keep, Wendell Caldwell heard a voice he hadn't heard in 3 years say, "Good morning, Wendell. We should talk about the chain of command." I heard him exhale. Just once. The sound a man makes when the floor he's standing on stops being a floor. I let him sit with it for exactly 4 hours. I could have gone up immediately. I didn't. I spent the morning in the Varenza war room 2 blocks away, reviewing the one document that mattered more than any other, the Aldermere Partnership Agreement. I'd read it 100 times over 7 years. I knew, the way you know the layout of a house you grew up in, that Caldwell's entire position rested on a managing partner clause that survived only as long as the firm remained independently controlled. The moment Aldermere became a Varenza division, that clause didn't transfer. It evaporated. His title, his authority, his corner office, all of it now existed at the pleasure of the integration office, at the pleasure of me. At 1 o'clock, I rode the elevator up the same 41 floors I'd ridden down 3 years earlier. The receptionist still didn't recognize me. I told her my name and watched it land on her like a dropped tray. She'd seen the email. By the time I crossed the marble, the whole 43rd floor knew the Marlowe running the integration and the Lucia they'd watched leave with a box were the same person. The partners had gathered in the aquarium. Of course they had. Caldwell had called an emergency meeting to manage the transition, he'd told them, which meant to manufacture a version of events where he was still in charge. I walked in without knocking. The glass walls did what they'd always done, turned the room into a display. Except now, the 41st floor associates pressed against the far glass weren't watching me be evaluated. They were watching me arrive. Some of them, I'd learn later, had started recording on their phones the moment the email went out at dawn. Caldwell stood at the head of the table, the river behind him. He'd dressed for it. The careful, expensive suit, the silver hair. He smiled the warm smile, the caterer smile, and for one breath I genuinely admired the nerve of it. "Lucia." He spread his hands. "What a turn of events. Sit. Let's talk like adults about how we manage this sensibly. I think you'll find I'm prepared to be very generous about your role going forward." I didn't sit. I'd done my chair pulling in this room already, 3 years ago. "Wendell," I said, "I'm not here to talk about my role. My role is settled. I'm here to talk about yours." The smile held, but his eyes did the thing. The flicker. Let me make the structure clear, since the email may have been brief. I set one page on the table, the integration mandate, my signature at the bottom, Inez's above it. Effective at midnight, every account, every team, and every partner in this firm reports through the integration office. I am the integration office. That includes you. I let it sit. You report to me now. A partner halfway down the table, the man whose entire client book I'd built and handed him, made a small involuntary sound. Caldwell laughed. It came out wrong. That's a technicality. Varenza bought a brand. They need continuity. They need me at the client table. They need the clients, I said. And the clients are already mine. Brenvik, Calder, Meridian. They've been Varenza accounts for 2 years, Wendell. You told the partners you outgrew them. You didn't. They left the day I did. You've been managing partner of a firm that was already hollow. You just hadn't reached the part of the building where the floor was missing. His jaw worked. Around the table, the partners were performing the same studious silence I remembered. Heads down, eyes on notepads. Except now the silence was pointed at him. The diorama had turned. He felt it. I watched him feel it. Here's where we are, I said evenly, the way I'd once briefed his clients on the unpleasant truth of their balance sheets. Your managing partner authority was contractual. It was contingent on independent control of the firm. That control ended at midnight. As of this morning, you hold the title on the door and nothing behind it. Your partnership stake converts to Varenza equity under the deal terms, at a valuation that reflects 4 down quarters and a litigation you buried in the Meridian file and thought no one would find. I paused. I found it in 11 minutes. It was filed under the wrong client code. Sloppy, Wendell. You'd never have let me file something that sloppy. The collapse, when it came, didn't look like a collapse. It looked like a man trying 3 different faces in the space of 5 seconds. First, the threat. You think Varenza will let you run a personal vendetta? I'll go to their board. Then the bargain, instantly, as he remembered who their board listened to. Lucia, be reasonable. We can find an advisory structure, a transition seat, something that respects what I built here. Then, last, lowest, the thing I'd waited 3 years to hear from a man who'd called my 7 years a Polish problem. Please, don't do to me what I did to you. The room went absolutely still. The associates at the glass had stopped pretending not to watch. I let the sentence hang in the air long enough that he had to live inside it. I'm not going to do to you what you did to me, I said. You spent 7 years pretending the work was beneath you. I'm not going to pretend you're beneath me. I'm going to do something much worse. I picked up my page. I'm going to manage you fairly. By the numbers you always said were the real measure. You'll get exactly the role your performance has earned, and we both know what that is. I turned to the partners. Senior leadership review starts tomorrow, Ada.M. Bring your books. Real numbers, real attribution. The era of names on title slides is over. I looked back at Caldwell one last time. You're welcome to attend, as an analyst. Through the glass, on the 41st floor where I'd spent 7 years under humming light, someone, I never found out who, began very quietly to applaud. The senior leadership review started at 8 the next morning, and I ran it from the head of the aquarium table. The chair with the river behind it, the one I'd never been allowed to keep. I did exactly what I'd promised. I ran it by the numbers. Each partner brought their book. Real attribution this time. Not who appeared at the dinner, but who built the model, carried the relationship, did the work. It is remarkable how quickly a firm reorganizes itself once the only currency is contribution. 2 partners, when stripped of the accounts they'd inherited from people they'd pushed out, turned out to have generated almost nothing in 3 years. They resigned within the month. The junior partner whose name had floated above mine on the Meridian slide came to my office, closed the door, and offered, with genuine fear in his voice, to do whatever's useful. I kept him. He was capable underneath the entitlement, and there is a particular efficiency in being managed by someone who has watched you take credit for her work and knows exactly what you're worth. He became, in time, one of the better operators on the floor. People can change when the incentive to stay the same is removed. Caldwell did not resign. I want to be precise about what happened to him because the truth was quieter and harder than any firing. I didn't fire him. I'd meant what I said. I was going to manage him fairly by the numbers, and the numbers were merciless without my needing to add a thing. Under the Varenza structure, his managing partner title dissolved into a title that meant nothing, and his compensation reset to reflect what he actually originated, which after the marquee accounts walked was a fraction of what he'd drawn for years. He kept the corner office for exactly 6 weeks until the integration consolidated the executive floor and the corner offices were converted to client space. He was reassigned to a desk in the open bay on the 41st floor. Not as punishment, I told the integration committee, but because that was where the analysts sat, and that was the work the numbers supported. The fluorescent light up there still hummed at the frequency only I had ever seemed to notice. He noticed it now. He lasted 4 months. A man like Wendell Caldwell cannot survive being ordinary in a building where he was once a god, and the day he came to tell me he was leaving to pursue advisory opportunities, he tried, one last time, to find the old footing. "You know," he said, standing in my doorway, "none of this had to be personal." "It wasn't," I said, and I meant it. "That's the part you still don't understand. I didn't bring you down, Wendell. I just stopped holding you up. You never knew I was." He left. The advisory opportunities, the network told me, never quite materialized. It's hard to sell yourself as a turnaround partner when the most public turnaround in the city's consulting world was the one that happened to your own firm the moment your best person left and came back at the top. He surfaced eventually at a small shop 2 tiers down, the kind of place Aldermere's partners used to speak about with contempt. I didn't follow it closely. I'd stopped carrying the stone in my coat pocket. There was no need. I knew exactly where it had landed. The integration finished ahead of schedule. The Aldermere name came off the building that summer. The 3 floors went over to Varenza, and the glass-walled conference room the associates had called the aquarium became, on my one sentimental instruction, an open meeting space anyone on any floor could book. No more watching people get evaluated through glass. If we were going to judge someone's worth, we'd do it looking at their work, not their reflection. Ines called me the day the rebrand went live. "You could have burned it down," she said. "Most people would have. You built it back instead." "Why?" I thought about it. Outside my window, a window I'd earned, on a floor I'd earned, with a river view that was finally, unambiguously mine, the city went about its afternoon. "Because burning it down would have proved him right," I said. He always thought the work didn't matter, that a firm was just polish and presence and the right person at the table. If I'd destroyed it, I'd have been agreeing with him. Building it back proved the opposite. The work was the firm. It always was. He just never had to know that until it was sitting at his desk. There's a moment I come back to, more than the confrontation, more than the applause through the glass. It's smaller. A few weeks after the review, the senior associate who'd mouthed "I'm sorry" through the aquarium glass 3 years earlier, the one whose sorry had never become a word said aloud, came to my office. She didn't apologize again. She was smarter than that. She put a project on my desk, a good one, entirely her own work, her name on the title slide where it belonged, and she said, "I wanted you to see it before anyone else did." I looked at it for a long time. "It's excellent," I told her. And then, because someone should have said it to me 7 years ago and no one ever did, "Make sure your name stays on it, all the way to the top of the page." People ask me sometimes whether it felt like revenge. It didn't. Revenge is loud, and it's about them. This was quiet, and it was about me. Wendell Caldwell spent 7 years deciding which people belonged in the room and which people fetched the coffee, and he was so certain of his own eye that he never once considered the possibility that the woman he'd graduated was the room. The whole room. He just couldn't see it because he was too busy looking at his reflection in the glass dot. I see the glass differently now. I don't look for my reflection in it. I look at who's on the other side, and I make sure they know I can see them.